I'm Jamie Levy. I'm the Director of Adversary Tactics here. We are a group of researchers who do a lot of different things from threat intel to gap analysis and root cause analysis. A lot of times we're doing forensic malware type stuff and more interesting investigations.
Yeah, my name is Chris Henderson. I run threat operations here. So that includes Jamie's team, but also our product research team, which helps ensure that our products are keeping up with the tradecraft that Jamie's team finds, as well as detection engineering that actually codes up the ability for us to detect and send those alerts over the SOC that ultimately make it to our customers. I also run internal security. It's a big, fun job, but ever evolving. And so great to be here.
Yeah, totally. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it then. So the first thing we're going to do, let's talk about the agenda, the things that we're going to cover. We're going to talk a little bit about the threat landscape. We're going to talk a little bit about adversary tradecraft. Then we're going to talk about some of the trends that we've seen in our customer base. And then we're going to give you some mitigations and kind of conclude it and have some QA at the end. So first of all the different threats that happen to various companies kind of fall within these four buckets. We have ransomware, we have advanced persistent threat, which we'll just call APTs going forward. We also have business email compromise, which you'll see abbreviated as BC a lot in these slides. And then we have hacktivism as well. So ransomware is definitely top of mind. We've had some interesting things that have happened worldwide recently, including the CDK hack, which just recently happened and disrupted operations at various car dealerships recently. So hopefully not a lot of people here are affected by that, but definitely very unpleasant. We also have Chinese and North Korean hackers, which are targeting global infrastructure and some other APT entities as well. Global infrastructure's obviously a ripe target. But even more egregiously, we're starting to see trends in ransomware going into healthcare. Healthcare was originally something that was off the table for ransomware actors. It was considered obviously gross, like you wouldn't want to ransom a hospital or whatnot, and it put people's lives in danger. And you have to think about these ransomware actors, they're affiliates, they're trying to hire people to conduct these activities. And so that might be something that's a bit off-putting to someone who's kind of breaking into this. But we've noticed that it's becoming normalized. Ransomware actors are starting to target healthcare entities. And we saw this recently with United Healthcare, for instance, a very large entity that was ransomed. And not only did it affect just United Healthcare, but it affected pharmacies, it affected doctors, et cetera, because people were not able to be paid because the payment system was affected. And so definitely there were a lot of impacts regarding this particular ransom. But even more egregious is outright targeting hospitals. And we're starting to see upticks in that from ransomware entities. So we've had hospitals that are ransomed. Not only is one hospital ransomed, but it might be a hospital chain. So then that has even wider effects. And then if you have chains of hospitals, it might not even just be a localized area. It might be across different states. So you're starting to notice that this is having a very widespread impact. And we'll talk about some of the possible motivations for some of these things. I mean, obviously, it could be a financial component, but sometimes it's more of an ideological component that's happening here. Chris, do you have any thoughts that you want to put in here?
Yeah, I think when you look at the healthcare attacks that are happening now, specifically against the supply chain, we see a lot of similarities to the MSP targeting of the MSPs. The one-to-many impact, it incentivizes a quick payment, it incentivizes quick resolution, not a lot of negotiation. And so just given the one-to-many impact that they can make here, I think they see it as both a high likelihood to get paid, given the criticality of what these businesses are doing, but also just how they can distribute the impact by attacking one entity and then impacting all of their subsequent supply chain. And when that supply chain relies on the health of individuals and health outcomes, again, it's just increasing that incentive to pay and get a quick resolution.
Yeah, totally. You bring up a lot of good points. And also, Philip is asking, is healthcare more likely to pay out? Obviously, yeah. I mean, when we're talking about life and death scenarios, it really makes it real. Like you're most likely going to pay out, or even just the legal ramifications of, sometimes there's not an actual ransomware, but there's extortion, right? And so a lot of times healthcare entities, like they, perceived high cash flow, they may be more likely to pay out and definitely vulnerable to those type of scenarios. So other threats that affect different companies, advanced persistent threats. And so when you're looking at advanced persistent threats, this is where you have a government-backed entity that is going after information usually, or it could even be the end game is disruption. But typically, it's more of espionage that we see on this side of things. And a lot of times you'll see things like China and North Korea, various entities that are targeting various different companies for whatever reason, usually the intel side of things. And so they target everything, including healthcare, which we've noticed a lot of different upticks in with China, in particular, targeting anything from like biotechnologies to just straight up, hospitals and whatnot, just to get information. And so HHS actually put together a nice little graphic where they broke this up. You see biotechnology, healthcare, IT, you see medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and then the R&D, the science and research consulting. All of these are ripe targets, and you see all these different APT groups, a lot of them China, some of them North Korea, some of them Asia, et cetera, like other Asian entities. But you see like how they've nicely broken this up. But it's not just healthcare, it's everybody who can be targeted, obviously. And so you're seeing attacks towards manufacturing and IT industries. You're seeing you're seeing other like defense contractors being targeted. But then the interesting shift is that some of these APT groups, instead of just doing straight up espionage, they're ending with ransomware. So like before they weren't really disruptive, they were just stealing the information, but now they're actually going full force into ransomware. And part of that could be disguising their espionage activities, or it could even be disruption. So that's pretty much like a scary thought, like that now it's no longer just the intellectual theft, but now there is actual destruction at the end of this. Do you
Yeah,
have anything
the
you want to
beginning of
add?
the beginning of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, we saw the mass deployment of wipers, and so they were just skipping the ransomware step. They didn't even care. It's just the disruption they wanted to cause was wiping machines, and so you saw companies getting targeted with that, getting a little out of control, and companies getting caught in the crossfire. And you had Ukrainian organizations that were not involved in the conflict getting hit with these wipers, and so. The APTs, even if you are not doing sort of state work or humanitarian work, you're not immune to this. We even see within our customer base, predominantly in industries that are not involved with humanitarian work or like biomedical or things like that, they still get caught up in these APT activities. And so just understand sort of what it is that your industry is doing or your clients are doing, and really understand how does that increase your risk thresholds.
Yeah, good points. We're also going to talk about business email compromise, which is another basically threat against different companies. And there could be many facets of how this actually plays out. We have a couple of graphics here, one of them from CISA, one of them from Interpol. But it could start out that you have a criminal, obviously motivated by financial reasons, picking out a target, picking out a company that they want to target, picking out who they want to target from that company and starting to groom them, starting to build some rapport with them. And once they've built out that rapport, then exchanging some information and possibly sending information to where they want this money wire transferred to. But it could be also just straight up compromise. Could be compromising an email account, and then using that particular email account to build credibility against another intended target. So obviously, if it's coming from a place of authority or some place where that relationship already exists, it's easier to use that compromised account in order to gain information from other targets. But we're starting to see other upticks in business email compromise from the healthcare side. For instance, Abnormal put out a report where they saw that there was a 279% increase in business email compromise in 2023 just in healthcare alone. And even the HIPAA Journal put out a warning about business email compromise, just to be cognizant of it, that there's an uptick there, and citing some various statistics that were put out by the FBI that you could see the dollar amounts that are associated with this. Over $50 billion that were lost as a result of business email compromise from October 2013 through December 2022. And you can imagine that this dollar amount has only increased, right? I mean, we're 2 years since this report was released, and it's only gotten worse. Chris, do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think unlike some of the other things we're talking about, if your organization gets ransomed or data exfiltrated, generally what you're losing is the PII of your customers. This type of attack has a direct financial implication, very likely for your customers, where especially if you're in the real estate industry or other banking industries, where the ability for you to then send accidentally malicious instructions to your customers around wire transfers, et cetera. This is most common to impact the individual as well as the customer. The other problem here is reversing this is very difficult. And so when you do fall victim to this, because the money has actually moved bank accounts through wires, and ultimately a lot of these business email compromise end with wire transfer fraud. When that occurs, it's extraordinarily difficult to pull that money back because cash is truly moved. And so this is one of those, if it works, they're largely out safe with the money, and there's not a lot you can do to make yourself whole.
Yeah, and it can be totally devastating, as you can imagine. For some companies, this could basically be something that they never recover from.
Absolutely.
So our last facet we're going to talk about is hacktivism. So hacktivism is something that's always been around, but there's starting to be an increase in that as well. And this is where you have these ideological factors that kind of pull into this. So as we're all well aware, there's a lot of different types of wars and conflicts that are going on. In particular, the one between Israel and Palestinians. And so as a result of that, you have this group, GhostSec, which is starting to refocus back on hacktivism against Israeli companies. And so that's a pretty solid example. Also, you have the Hacker News, which they put out a release of all these different types of hacktivism groups that they're aware of, kind of where they result from. You can see that the highest numbers from Ukraine, which makes sense given the conflict between Ukrainians and Russians. And you can kind of see like how this is distributed. This is all over the world. People hacking things based on their thoughts of how things should go, trying to get eyes on their cause. And this is definitely a way to go about doing it. And not only that, but like everything is on the table, including healthcare entities. And so we've noticed within the last year, like there have been upticks in hacktivist groups going after healthcare entities. Also, as a result of the Russian-Ukrainian conflicts, KillNet is one such group. They've coordinated, this was as of April of last year, over 90 attacks against organizations within just the US, and some of those including hospitals. And then again, as a result of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, this has only gotten worse. The Red Cross had put out rules of engagement basically naming civilian hackers or civilians and hospitals and healthcare facilities off the table. But these hacktivists have basically said, we're going to do what we want. We're going to go after these targets, and they're doing this in order to gain eyes on their cause, right, and to also inflict harm. And so even recently, there was an attack by the Shilin ransomware actors against London hospitals, and that had obviously some very chaotic effects pulling out of that. Rescheduled surgeries, C-sections, organs for organ transplants being diverted to other places, just complete chaos, as you can imagine, as a hospital is shut down as a result of ransomware. And BBC actually interviewed these threat actors and asked them straight up, "How can you do this? These are innocent people." And you can see that the threat actors do not care. They're just like, "All right, that's it. We're not going to talk to you anymore." They have basically dehumanized the other side, and at this point, they're only interested in their cause. Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
I think the hacktivism, it becomes more and more extreme the longer the group exists. Like any online community, when it becomes an echo chamber, just increasing their own sort of extremism and willingness to go these lengths. And so I think anytime you have these closed groups that actively kick dissenting opinion out, you get more and more extreme views. And while hacktivism may absolutely start with a very moral and just cause, seeing where it goes from there, it doesn't always stay that way. I think you also have with vigilantes, and there's no governance over it, and so their ability to pick an accurate target is only as good as their own people. And so without sort of their own organizational governance, it's largely the Wild West within these groups, even if they do it for their own perceived moral causes.
Yeah, totally. Cool. So just kind of to wrap up that section, we see that there's multiple different types of threat actors that we have to be cognizant of. Anything from just grassroots activists to nation state funded APTs, and then just people trying to get something for financial gain. We see the impacts, the ransomware, business email compromise, hacktivism, and we know that everybody is vulnerable, and some of them have even higher bars of what the ramifications could be, like real, true life and death scenarios, as we see within the healthcare sector. But there's also the legal ramifications that are perceived, and usually these targets are chosen either because they have some kind of cash flow availability, or they have some kind of information that the attackers are looking for. And a lot of times, these companies are targeted because of a perceived low bar of entry. Again, looking at healthcare, how many times have you been to a doctor's office and you've seen a Windows 7 machine or something in a corner, and because it has some particular software that is key to that particular doctor's office, maybe it's a payment system or whatever it is, nobody maintains it anymore, whatever, and they have to have it on that particular operating system because that's the only thing it runs on, right? I think we've all kind of seen that, and you could just kind of imagine like how easy it would be to break into something like that. Any thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when you're looking through and thinking through the motivations of these attackers, and you're running a threat model against your organization to understand sort of, are we spending enough here? Are we implementing the correct controls? Thinking through the motivations in your clients' businesses, your businesses, and what you're in. I don't want people to think, oh, great, well, I'm not in healthcare and we don't have a lot of cash, therefore we're not a target. And so rather than looking at this as a carving out, you really want to look at the motivations to increase your risk rather than looking at it as a way to try to decrease your perceived risk. And so if you are in any of these businesses that are perceived easy targets, you want to use that justifying, higher spend of cybersecurity versus your revenue. And so you're in healthcare, you're looking at 6, 8, 10% potentially instead of your standard advice of 3 to 5. And so use these as multipliers to your budgets and understanding, are you spending relative to your risk?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the threat life cycle. So oftentimes, this is what a typical threat lifecycle might look like. First of all, you have your exploitation. This is where the attacker is taking advantage of some kind of buggy software or device or something like this that's exposed to the internet. It could also be a person sending out a phishing email, right? Maybe a person is the target and the weakest link in that case. Then you have your initial access. So this is where they've finally gotten foothold into the targeted infrastructure. And so gaining that initial foothold, they might put some persistence mechanism in order to get back to that particular box that has been compromised. And then they're going to enable access. They're going to establish other persistence mechanisms and ways to get back in case that first method is no longer accessible. And then they're going to start to laterally move. And so they're going to dump credentials. They're going to gain access to other machines that are on the network. And they're going to start pivoting around and looking for valuable information to take and to see kind of what's there. And then you're going to have your exfiltration stage where they're stealing the information, they're taking it back, and they're going to do something with that. It could be just credentials that they're going to sell on the dark web. It could be information. It could be anything that they perceive as interesting. And then the final step may or may not be ransomware extortion. And this is for the financial side of things, is trying to get the company to pay something in order to get their information back or prevent it from being released in the first place. So just a little bit of overview about this. Note that attackers are constantly evolving. So you need to be cognizant of this whole threat landscape, but also as you start to remove avenues for attackers to be able to establish their first foothold, they are going to evolve. We have seen that even within the last year, attackers shifting their the ways that they're getting in. So they might start out with traditional phishing methods like sending a zip file or something like this, and then after a while, this is not working for them anymore. So they might start to send other types of other files to get it access. And so also they're going to try to avoid being detected. They're going to try to blend into the environment. They're going to use legitimate tooling. We've seen upticks in attackers using RMM tools or other sysadmin tools in order to just kind of stay in the environment without anybody knowing that they're there. And they're moving away from malware. They're starting to use more of just what we call living on the land, just binaries that are already there. They see what security tools are in place. They figure out how can they utilize that to their advantage, or they're going to use RMMs, or they're going to use unpatched drivers. There are some drivers or other software that may be unpatched, but they know that there's a vulnerability in it, and they could use that to their advantage in order to gain access to other things on the system. Any thoughts there, Chris?
No, I mean, I think your points of the tradecraft is ever evolving, and as soon as we find good defenses, it is they find new novel attacks, and so ensuring somebody's job at your company is to digest these on a at worst case quarterly basis and understand. When I say this, I mean right, our threat reports, DFIR reports, Verizon breach reports, like consuming as many of these threat reports as you can and questioning yourself on a very regular basis. Am I still as in a good of a defensive posture as I was a quarter ago, depending on where the tradecraft has moved? And so even something as simple as is my security awareness training still effective? Looking at if you're training your employees to detect grammatical errors in phishing emails, well, ChatGPT has made that not a thing anymore. And Gen AI has made it trivial to make grammatically accurate phishing emails, even if you are not a native speaker of that language at all. And so constantly looking at what threats are evolving, what new things are out there, and are my defenses still up to par with where I think we are at? Because you're
Yeah,
not
totally.
evolving, you're just sliding backwards.
Totally. Yeah, this is an ongoing process. So an example of the phishing evolution, this is back in 2022. There was a move away from macros. Macros were disabled or no longer available for attackers to use. And so what did they do? They moved over into using ISO files, image files, et cetera. So they would send these to the intended target along with instructions on how to mount these and interact with them. So we definitely saw an uptick of that during that time frame here within our customer base. Also, credential theft. So as we mentioned, as part of that kill chain, uh, attackers are dumping credentials as part of their lateral movement methodology. And a lot of times they will take those credentials and they will sell them somewhere else. So even if you're able to stop the attacker, within the middle of, like you haven't gotten ransom, but you stop them right after the credential theft part of this, you're still at risk. Your credentials are now out there. The attackers can use these. They could try to figure out, are these still available? Are they able to still log into your infrastructure, even though you've kicked them out at one point? But now they're going to log in legitimately using these credentials. So here's an example of credential theft and abuse, kind of this whole timeline of what usually happens. The attacker will install a Trojan or stealer on there. It kind of runs in the background, collects information. Then they dump the credentials, could be credential dumping, key logging. They're going to exfiltrate this. There's going to be an access broker on the end of this who's going to be able to sell these to other threat actors who can then just purchase them and then log in at ease. And so this is kind of the cycle of credential theft and abuse. Also, attackers are often exploiting applications in order to get in. And so last year in particular, we saw a lot of these 0 days that just came out, and at one point it was just overwhelming. We looked at a lot of them ourselves here at Huntress, but it just became a lot. Like there was the Screen Connect stuff that happened. There was MS SQL servers that were being attacked. There were code signing certificates that were stolen. There was WSFTP exploitation, slash and grab, and move it, which just seemed like it was never going to die. And then now it's just come back with another vulnerability within the last week. And so it's just an ongoing thing where you're going to always have these buggy applications. There's always going to be 0 days. There's always going to be exploitation. It's just something to be aware of, and you try to get ahead of it as quickly as you can, make sure that you're patched, et cetera, as quickly as you can be. Any thoughts there, Chris?
Yeah. No, I mean, Clop was so fast with the move it exploit. They had more data. They couldn't even figure out who they had gotten. And it took them like a month or two to even sort through everybody that they had breached to start sending out notifications. And so this, the attacker supply chain has some of the very similar problems that we have as businesses of, disorganization sometimes, and making sure that your game plan of, okay, we've popped this thing, we're going to gather data, and thinking through what happens next, as opposed to putting down that excitement of like, oh, we just got something. And so it's interesting to see some of the same sort of business failures we see within the threat actors groups.
Yeah, totally. And again, attackers are starting to shift more into blending into the environment. It allows them to stay there longer. Attackers are patient. Sometimes they'll stay there days, weeks, months. We've even seen cases, I've definitely seen cases over my career of like where attackers have been there for even years before people noticed. And so yeah, they're blending in, they're using existing tools, they're using RMMs, for instance, and why not? Because this is easy, it's off the shelf. You can spin up a trial pretty easily. You don't have to build anything yourself; it just works.
There's help desk articles.
There's help desk articles. A lot of our customers, or not a lot of them, but there are customers that we've seen where they have even 5 of these RMMs because every admin wants their own version or whatever that they're comfortable with. So what's a sixth RMM in the environment? Nobody's going to even bat an eye to this. And so, yeah, they could totally do this, lie in wait, blend in. Nobody's looking.
Yeah, a lot of this too is also they're just getting they're farming access through automation, and so as soon
Mhm.
as they've got it and they drop whatever, however they're going to get remote access later on and set up persistence, a lot of it is just you got caught up by some automated tool and they don't have the bandwidth to get to you yet, and it's just you're just waiting for the inevitable.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could just be instead of playing the long game, they're just yeah, you're just stuck in the queue.
Yep.
Cool. So we're going to go over some of the stuff that we've seen within the last year in our customer base. So we talked a bit about remote software. We put all of these things together. So we have actual like attacker remote software like Interpreter, Cobalt Strike, et cetera, that we've heard of, and various types of other RATs, remote administrative tools. But then we also see an uptick in Screen Connect, Atera, Net Support, et cetera, like used illegitimately by threat actors. And so just keeping in mind that they're going to use whatever's available to them and whatever's easiest for them, and they're going to blend in. And so we do see a lot of that happening here within our customer base. And then credential dumping tools, we wanted to kind of see what are they using as part of that credential dumping part of their attack. And so we see a lot of these things that are pretty well known and documented, like ProcDump, Mimikatz, comservices.dll, Zagni, etc. There were a lot of other miscellaneous tools. Some of these were things that you could find just off the shelf in like GitHub repos or whatnot, but they just weren't statistically significant to pull out into their own category. But then we also started to see some novel methods, some things that attackers were doing that haven't been well documented. And so that's where it gets interesting that you see the attackers evolving and finding more interesting ways of getting to the information that they want. Other interesting things that we saw last year had to do with Qakbot and some of the ransomware families. So Qakbot is an initial access malware. Uh, Oftentimes, after it's been deployed, the end result would be some ransomware uh, as a final step. And so Qakbot's interesting. Back in 2022, we had a very huge increase of Qakbot, and we noticed that there was a way that we could have a vaccine for Qakbot in order to kind of cut down on these incidents. And so we deployed that, and that did help. But as we can see, this is 2023. There's quite still a lot of incidents with Qakbot, so it didn't totally knock that out. It had evolved and stopped using that vaccine method to check whether or not it was infected already. But what's interesting is that in August of 2023, at the end of August of 2023, the government basically issued a takedown of Qakbot and destroyed their infrastructure. And we can see just looking at Qakbot data that, yeah, it definitely had an impact for the month of September, but Qakbot came back. It came back in October, November, et cetera. So it didn't totally destroy it, kind of hobbled it for a little bit, and then it made its way back. So that was interesting. But where it gets even more interesting is when you start looking at ransomware variants and just trying to see like whether or not Qakbot's takedown had any effect on what ransomware variants were being used by attackers. After that, we start to notice that we have an uptick, a very sharp uptick in Lockbit variants starting to make the scene in September. We see upticks in Darkgate, Black Basta, et cetera. But where it gets even more interesting is when you start to look at other initial access malware, such as Emotet, and you see that there's a mirrored effect here. You see Qakbot ticking down, Emotet immediately ticking up, and then as Emotet starts to come back down, Qakbot is ticking back up. And so you see that it looks very like you could see the relationship there. And so if you think about this from like how things work in nature, where you have predators and they have there's certain boundaries and territories that they work within, predators will keep other predators out. So if you have coyotes, for instance, they will keep other coyotes out of their territory. And if you take out a predator, other predators will come in to that void. And so what we're seeing here is as one particular predator is taken out, another one moves in. And so it totally makes sense. And it's interesting to see it in the data. And it also kind of raises a question of like, how effective are these takedowns? Should we start to consider other methods of disenfranchising threat actors? So yeah, any thoughts that you want to add there, Chris?
No, I the business side of this I find super interesting. Like if you think about Qakbot, Emotet, these are all companies. I mean, not registered ones, but they operate just like any other business, except they employ people that are largely not employable by anybody else other than other threat actors. And so if you take one down, you've left a whole bunch of people who have families to feed, largely without an income. And where are they going to go? They can't get legitimate jobs. They have no work history. And so they're just going to move to the other affiliate groups, other ransomware operators, other access brokers. And so removing these people's front ends and taking down their infrastructure. Infrastructure as code, you can stand up new infrastructure trivially now. And so the ability to actually shut these people down is going to need to change. Simply taking out infrastructure, as we see here, it's not moving the needle of actually making us more secure.
Agreed. So one of the other things that we did was we just looked at all the different ransomware families that we saw across our customer base. So you could kind of see that Dharma was the most prevalent one, followed by Lockbit and Ink. It's also interesting that we saw variants of CLOP. So CLOP is actually like a targeted APT type ransomware family. And so we do see some of the targeted stuff as well within our customer base. Looking at, we basically looked at a couple of different verticals in our customer base. We looked at healthcare, we looked at industrial customers. And so just, it was curious just to see like what were the most common threats within those two verticals. So within healthcare, the top thing that we saw that afflicted our healthcare customers was Trojans and rats. Some of this initial access malware like Qakbot, Emotet, etc. We saw upticks in RMM abuse. But yeah, some of the other stuff is really not that surprising. And we also wanted to see what were the different ransomware variants that we saw specifically within healthcare. And then notice that it's not particularly diverse as far as like the top actors. We have Dharma, Darkgate, and Lockbit that are the most prevalent. And there are a bunch of miscellaneous ransomware. So some of them are known variants, but they just weren't statistically relevant. And then there were a lot of like new kind of like custom made ransomware type stuff. And so it's interesting because it seems to point to new players trying to enter the field. And it might be a combination of this low hanging fruit type thing of healthcare, but then also people just trying to put their own spin on things and their own ransomware variants. And so there were these kind of new things that we saw within this particular customer base.
It's like they're almost using the healthcare industry as a training ground for their new
yeah
test
as
out
a sandbox.
It's such a soft target that hey, let's send our new people against there. They're still likely to win, and we can get them experience to go against some other fish.
Yeah, totally. And in general, because a lot of our customer base is below the cybersecurity poverty line, they are the sandbox for these threat actors to try out new methods. And we definitely have seen things like that, where there are these kind of novel things that we haven't seen elsewhere. But yeah, and then we also looked at the M365 threats in healthcare just to kind of see what's going on there. The biggest issues were mailbox rules and VPN proxies, et cetera. when you have these mailbox rules, a lot of times what they are is where you have a compromised mailbox, and the attacker is basically employing these mailbox rules in order to keep the owner of the mailbox from realizing that their mailbox has been compromised. So as they're getting replies back from potential targets, they're being filtered off into a folder that the original mailbox owner may not even notice. And so they're unaware that their mailbox is even compromised. And so we saw a bit of that in our healthcare industry. Looking at industrial threats, the most prolific things that we saw there were initial access ransomware or initial access malware, a cryptocurrency. And that's kind of interesting because the cryptocurrency stuff, it may be because some of these customers, like as we kind of dug into it, we saw that they had like some higher end machines and they're kind of on all the time. So obviously that would be good for crypto miners to just be able to take advantage of that. And so there were also a lot of miscellaneous type things. So we saw some kind of novel methods, which was interesting. You start to see that kind of sandbox stuff. But some of the other stuff is really not as surprising. And then looking at ransomware on the industrial industry, it was pretty interesting because it's much more diverse. We have Lockbit, Play, Dharma, Akira, Clock. We have Darkgate, and then again, these miscellaneous, these new kind of novel ransomware actors that are trying to move into this threat landscape. But it's interesting because we have CLAP, which is targeted, which makes sense because on the industrial side, like there's going to be there were some that were like government contractors, et cetera. So there's actually interesting things for an APT to actually steal on that side. And you can see also the mailbox rules was much larger within the industrial customers that we have. Again, uh, it would make sense that these particular customers are targeted from business email compromise side of things because of perceived cash flow. A lot of times there will be wire transfers with these particular customers, a lot more than some of our other customer base. And so it makes sense that they would be ripe targets and that you would see this uptick here.
Yeah, the IP theft also and industrial espionage that can occur within this industry very different than hospitals, and so that's why we likely see these threats are positioned a little differently.
Yeah, totally. So Chris, you want to talk some mitigation so we can kind
Yeah,
of figure out like what can we do about all
yeah.
of
What do we
this?
do, right? I think the first, a lot of people, you jump right to you need MDM, you need a SIM, everybody jumps to these technology solutions to detect intruders. But starting with asset management and inventories, like if you don't know what you have in your environment that you even need to protect with these other tools, then you're not going to get anywhere. Deploying Huntress, for example, to half of your workstations, you still have half of them vulnerable. And so ensuring that you know everywhere that you're protecting and you have your protections on everything and increasing your visibility really is going to be critical. Patching again, super. Don't get caught with some vulnerability because you were just reluctant to patch, or your employees were complaining about the downtime it took to their machine, or reboot in the middle of the day was disruptive. Patching is just as important as it always has been. It is easier than ever to scan the internet for vulnerable assets and exploit them automatically. And so if you're not taking those steps, absolutely make sure that your patching strategies are in place. And from a hardening standpoint, making sure you have things like RDP turned off and you're setting yourself up with secure standards and you're deploying your applications in a secure manner, mandatory MFA, making sure that you're checking on those things and making sure that you're checking for your hardening drift, right? Over time, your employees are going to change configurations on their machines, on their web apps, on their own individual MFA configurations. And so measuring that and tracking and making sure that you're controlling for that drift really is going to be critical to ensuring that you're not caught up in the very run-of-the-mill type of opportunistic attacks. If you want to go to the next slide, Jamie.
Yeah.
But additionally here, like beyond just your traditional, like go deploy the CIS controls, start at implementation group one. If you have nothing, move up from there, go through their assessments. It's really important when you're thinking through this to understand, like I said, the visibility. You can't protect what you don't see. And so for any of your tools that offer you visibility or protections that somebody is monitoring your infrastructure, make sure that it is fully deployed on everything. Deploying an EDR only on servers is not nearly as effective as making sure that it's on workstations as well, seeing as how most of your attacks come through workstations and then pivot to the servers when a human is involved or an access broker. Um, Ensuring you have visibility into M365 as well. And so it's all about making sure you can see everything. But also keeping current on attacker tradecraft. I will plug our own tradecraft Tuesday here. If you are not already signed up for those emails, we host a monthly webinar where Jamie's team, my team, we get on here for an hour and talk you through, here's what we've seen in the last month, either through phishing or for Windows and Mac or M365, but we'll keep you up to date every month with the latest trends we're seeing in those. And then having an informed response, really making sure you understand how, when the inevitable happens, how do we respond as an organization? But then also, how do we practice that and ensuring that you are truly ready? And also not forgetting your continuity plans, right? I think a lot of people look at ransomware as, oh, well, a hospital can pay. Why did it take them so long to get back up and running? Well, restoration takes a while. You're only restoring as fast as your local bandwidth is. And when you have terabytes of data to restore, that's going to take a long time. And so making sure your business can continue to operate even without those key technologies and that you have continuity plans in place beyond just disaster recovery plans really are going to keep you set and help your business sustain an attack like this.
Yeah, totally. These are all good points. But yeah, the main thing, you cannot protect what you cannot see, right?
Yes,
Asset management, huge thing. Making sure all your machines are covered by your security software, another big thing. Um, a, a lot of times, like we've had customers where they just installed the agent on what they perceived as important, right? So just the servers or just the C suite or whatever, right? But that's not often how the attackers are going to get in. They might get in on Joe's laptop. And if Joe's laptop doesn't have that security stuff installed on it, it's not going to do any good. And then, as we saw, once they gain access to that, they're going to figure out ways to get further into your infrastructure. So yeah, definitely that's a big point. And then one other thing I just want to highlight on the informed response is, you can do all the right things, and somebody may just open up the door at the end. Somebody might just let the attacker in. So make sure that you do some kind of security awareness training. Make sure that you let your employees know what are the best methods going forward, right? And that if they see something, to say something, right?
for sure. Yeah, training up everybody to make sure that they really understand, how do I report? What do I need to do when I report? And what your expected response to them will be critically important.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, like the best thing you could do in order to protect yourself is trying to understand the adversaries, trying to understand their tactics, their operations, motives, etc. What makes them tick? What makes them maybe want to target you? And also, don't fall prey to the fact that, or don't think that you aren't going to be a valid target. I think that's what a lot of people make mistakes of like, I'm too small. What do I have to offer? What would they care about me? And a lot of times you are more interesting than you think you are. Your company is more interesting than you think it is. And the thing is, it might not even be specifically what you have. It might be who you do business with or who is a customer of yours, right? So you have other risks that you may have not even considered, other than just the fact of like who you are and who your business is.
Yeah.
Um,
In this field, like your who you are as a business will only ever increase your risk. You will never decrease it simply due to the business that you're in. And so there is a baseline of risk that we all have for cyber attack that you'll never get below due to your own business practices and at least your likelihood to be a target. And so right? When you're in the medical, you're increasing your risk, but just because you're not a hospital doesn't mean you don't have risk. And so understanding that it's you can't go below a certain line. There's no negative risk here. It's everybody's a target.
Yeah, I mean, your target could, I mean, if you're like a dentist, right? Like your target could just be the patient, right? One of your patients that you're dealing with.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, and then making sure that you invest in defensive measures and making sure that you have playbooks and things just in case things go awry. But investing in your IT and security team, and that might be internal or external. You may actually decide, well, I can't really pay for my own SOC, but I can utilize a company who has a SOC, right? But making sure that you have that in place, making sure that you have an EDR in place. A lot of times that's even just compulsory for just compliance reasons, right? And then making sure that you prepare for the worst and have your playbooks and your backups and everything if you can, an incident response plan. I mean, figure out like what would happen, like if basically if this hit the fan, if you got ransomed or whatever, what's going to happen to you today? Think about that and start to try to put these measures in place.
Yeah.
Any
Also,
thoughts there?
if you, just one quick add, if you have a incident response retainer through either your MSP or yourself, and you don't use it in a year, you can still call in those hours to run through incident response tabletops. And often those IR teams, they're going to tailor their tabletops to what they've seen in the past 6 months to 12 months. So they're going to be really topical. And so don't let those retained dollars go to waste. Use them and engage your IR firms if you haven't had an incident and practice through with them and your own teams what would happen.
That's an excellent point and one that I wasn't even thinking about. But yeah, definitely. I mean, if you've already paid for it, you might as well
Absolutely.
utilize it, right? So awesome. Well, that kind of concludes what we were planning to talk about. But now we're in our QA point. So definitely feel free to download the cyber threat report. I think it's part of our downloads here. But yeah, what do you got? What are your questions? Hopefully, everybody enjoyed this.
There's no live questions, but there was one earlier I thought you might have an interesting opinion on. Is Han, I assume it's pronounced, he asked if hacking for the sake of it still really happens. Back in the like early 2000s, there were a lot of hackers doing it just for the notoriety. In your opinion, is that still largely a thing?
I would imagine that it is. I don't. I mean, yeah, I understand what you're talking about. Like the cuckoo's egg, right? Like there was,
Yeah.
people just kind of hacking into stuff for the sake of it. Of course, there was like the espionage side of it as well. But yeah, I would imagine. I mean, there's definitely like the Chaos Computer Club and all these other things. There's 2600. Like there's still groups, like um and there's still people mostly like I think nowadays it's people release tools, there's open source communities, there's that kind of stuff. Um but yeah, I don't know. The thing is there's so many more laws in place now
Yeah.
that make it not as worthwhile to gain access to something that you're not supposed to have access to, and you're more likely to be prosecuted for these things. So, as far as like breaking into something for the sake of it, probably not. But
Yeah. Definitely
there's a
easier than
lot
ever
of
to be caught.
yeah, but there's a lot of things like, car hacking and all these other things. Like people are still doing this stuff for the fun of it. They're going into like firmware and whatever. But yeah, so there's definitely still people hacking for the fun of it, but like not doing it illegitimately, not breaking into things or illegally, basically.
Yeah, it's more sort of above ground hacking as opposed to the more illicit. I think that also with the capture the flags, I think there's a lot more legitimate ways to show off
Hmm.
your skills. Hack the box, or even something like uh, um, Hacker One or Bug Crowd, where you can legitimize your hacking and get paid bounties for that. I think there's more avenues to make money off of this as an exploratory hobby than there ever have been, which is probably why we're seeing fewer of the notoriety hacks.
Yeah, that's another good point is that people are now getting paid for this stuff, right? Like you're doing the bug bounties and you're getting paid Pondone and all this other
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
right?
Oh, we have a question. No, we had a question before.
Uh, okay, somebody was asking about generative AI. So yeah, I mean, definitely people are using that for making malicious code or phishing or whatever. People are figuring out ways to get the AI to actually do that, even though it's not supposed to do that. Um, I think it's definitely being utilized in that methodology. We're also seeing some tools. It's kind of interesting. Like there's been some tools released that would allow you to do. Their goals were like being able to do analysis, so like disassembling and stuff like that. But being able to do that in a better way using generative AI and other generative AI to do CTFs to find vulnerabilities, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely it'll be interesting to see how things play out within the next couple of years, but definitely that has increased the abilities for some of the attackers uh, to get things spun up a little bit quicker. So yeah, good question, Liam.
Yeah, Liam, if you go to the past Tradecraft Tuesday episodes, there's one I did with Truman Kane on phishing with Gen AI, and beyond just crafting of the emails, the ability that you can use it to clone a voice, to on the fly craft responses based upon user input. It's far more useful beyond just using it to make an email that's grammatically accurate.
Yeah, totally. There was another question. Oh, so Han was asking if you're if you're able to cause a comparable amount of damage if you're just a lone wolf experimenting nowadays. I mean, I think anybody could make any type of
The wrong elk
damage if
query, I'll
you
knock over Huntress.
yeah, I mean, like sometimes it can even be like accidental. Like I mean, like we've seen things like where there were Amazon outages or something because some intern did something by accident or whatever. So yeah, I definitely it doesn't matter the amount of people that are behind whatever it is that's happening. You can definitely cause some damage. Cool deal. Any other
Awesome.
questions? Yeah, quality over quantity, Benjamin.
Yeah, if not a shameless marketing plug. If none of you are, or if you are in the hunt for a new EDR with a SOC on top of it, come give our platform a trial. It's super solid. Our sales reps are also super nice, and we won't harass you if you sign up for a trial, which I really appreciate. And so, please, if you're looking for a trial or a new EDR, give it a shot. If you're an MSP, we also have a neighborhood watch program. You can use our platform for free to protect yourself. We love MSPs and want to keep all of you safe. And so come check us out. And so with that, thank you. I don't think there's another slide. Is there, Jamie?
Nope.
Perfect. Awesome.
That wraps it up. And yeah, and if you do happen to have any other questions after this, we are pretty easy to find. So do feel free to email, reach out on Twitter, whatever you feel like.
Yeah, Alicia, MSSPs too. Come check us out.
Yeah, cool deal. Well, thank you very much for coming, and we really appreciate it. Had a great time.